So glad to have you back with us again for the TKN Leadership Podcast with Matthew Watley. I'm your host, Dr. Daryl Williams. Today, joining me, I have one of the great leaders of Christendom, the Reverend Dr. Charley Hames, the 66th consecrated and elected bishop of the CME Church. He is a leader par excellence. And Dr. Hames is going to teach us today about going from being an individual contributor and manager to administering and supervising leaders of leaders. He's a leader of leaders. So you all help me welcome Bishop Charley Hames. Bishop Hames, so good to have you with us today.
I am elated and honored to be with you, sir. It's such a joy.
Man, it is a blessing to have you with us. Now, I know you and know you well, but please tell our audience a little about yourself so they can know who Bishop Hames is.
Well, first of all, this is amazing that you all have created this kind of space to have this content that we can go back and watch for years to come. I am Bishop Charley Hames, Jr. I am the presiding prelate of the 9th Episcopal District in the Christian Methodist Episcopal Church, which is comprised of 7 states on the western seaboard, 86 churches. As far as Anchorage, Alaska, at the top, down to Oklahoma, the states of Washington, Oregon, Arizona, New Mexico, California, just to name the other 2. So that's our current work. I've pastored, I've been in ministry 32 years. 32? Has it been 32 years? Yeah, it's been 32 years. It'll be 33 this upcoming year.
I hate to admit that we're becoming who we looked up to.
Yeah, absolutely.
32 years, go ahead.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I'm the first, in my family, I'm the first preacher.
Okay.
In my immediate family, there are some in the extended family on both my father and my mother's side. Started preaching at the age of 17.
Okay.
I got saved at 16, and I've worked in corporate. I worked for Humana Healthcare Plans early on.
Okay.
Did commercial marketing. That's what gives me that simple edge. I've matriculated through Chicago State University, African American Studies major with emphasis in African anthropology, minor in psychology. I did a Master's of Divinity at the Garrett Evangelical Theological Seminary at Northwestern University. Then I did my doctoral of ministry degree at the Perkins School of Theology, Southern Methodist University. That concentration was in evangelism.
Gotcha. So this is what you've been doing all your life, except for when you were at Humana. Right. So you've been leading churches and leading people. Yeah. And he won't say it, but I'm going to say it out loud for him. Mm-hmm. The Beebe Cathedral in Oakland was one of the shining stars of the Christian Methodist Episcopal Church. Yes, tell us a little bit about your journey at Beebe. We're going to get to you being a bishop, but I want folk to know how you grew that organization, that church.
Well, first of all, it was a historical church that had major significance in the Oakland Bay Area setting, or San Francisco Bay Area setting. It was a church that had major leadership down through the years and strong lay leadership. Mm-hmm. Matter of fact, many of our general officers that the church had came out of that church.
Okay.
So it had a storied history, but it had, when I received it, it was really on life support.
Gotcha.
We had about 81 individuals in attendance. There were some members in diaspora, but they were not coming.
Sure.
And I'll share most of this probably through our presentation later. But that first year, 41 died. The second year, 37 died. So out of our active attendance, all of those individuals had died off. We were beginning to grow immediately, like we had took in 97 members that first year, but our retention was super low because we had no programs, we had nothing to hold people.
Okay, I'm just trying to do the math in my head.
Yeah.
Historic legacy church with great traditions. Mm-hmm. You had 80 plus active folk, and in the first year, 40 plus die.
That's correct.
In the second year, another 30 plus die.
Correct.
Help our audience understand. There's so much in here that I want to mine because this is great. This is great leadership stuff. So many of us, we inherit legacy institutions, and sometimes the story of who they were and the reality of who they are is different. When you came in and found the condition of Beebe, What was the first thing you do? What, from a leadership standpoint, did you say, these are some of the things I need to start doing right now?
The immediate thing that I did intentionally and unintentionally was build relationships.
Okay.
Because in order for a congregation that experienced so much loss over so many years and multiple pastors, they had trust issues.
Gotcha.
They didn't trust the pastor, neither did they trust themselves. So I had to immediately build relationships. And there's a myriad of stories I could tell, more than this podcast would allow.
Sure.
That did not lend itself to an easy transition to building trust.
Gotcha.
You know, the average age of the church was 71, which meant that multiple members were 80 plus. That's why we had so many deaths.
Now, hold on a second. Average age of the church is 71. How old are you at the time?
I'm 29.
You're 29 when you go in.
Yeah.
So you're a young man leading a mature organization, both in history and the people you're leading.
Absolutely. And many of them refer to me as, you're old enough to be my grandson.
Not your son, your grandson.
Grandson.
Gotcha.
Which is kind of like a double check, right? So what can you tell me? How can you share something that's going to be beneficial in this portion of my life? And really, you know, centering the Word of God. Really, I began to learn the statement that my grandmother gave me early on as a leader. She says, people will rather see a sermon than hear one any day. So I had to kind of be consistent in my lifestyle, which was a lot of pressure for a 29-year-old in a new environment that he's never been before. Right. And then they predicted that the church would close in 6 months because of how fast things were dying. Right. So as a leader, relationships were critical, interpersonal connections were critical, and then showing up for people in seminal moments.
Gotcha.
So not just the funerals, but when they had, you know, people in their family that had baby showers, etc. So Beebe eventually became community oriented because I had nobody in the immediate to pastor, so I had to pastor the community until I got people into the congregation. I think avid prayer life was critical to that whole piece. That's what kind of kept me sane and ultimately moving. The church changed its trajectory around 2006.
Okay.
And this is how it happened. It happened in talking about leadership. It happened when we had to sell the parsonage.
Okay.
Because when I walked in, not only had no members, really fledgling budget, but we had $1 million worth of debt.
No members.
Yeah.
Tight budget.
Yes.
$1 million worth of debt.
Absolutely.
To say you walked into a leadership challenge at 29 is an understatement. How did you begin to tackle that? Because it's one thing to have to bridge generation gaps, but have everything else be okay. There's pressure when you've got that.
Yeah. So it's pressure. So first, as a leader within yourself, you have to have a formidable resolve.
Sure.
Right. A conviction that, God, I know you called me here. Therefore, I believe you're going to supply me with the people and the resources. Now, even though you don't see them, your conviction is the very thing that helps navigate those tumultuous waters.
Gotcha.
So by 2006, we started to see people stick.
Okay.
And what I was, let me see if I can use the right term, what I was conveying, because I don't like to use the word selling, what I was conveying was a vision that was not yet come to pass.
Okay.
Right. Because that's all I could sell was vision, right? I was like, this is what I believe the church will be. If you can stick around and help me see this, we all will enjoy this kind of church. Wouldn't you like that kind of church? So vision became really the tantamount principle that drove that growth. So
you had to give people the ability to see what wasn't.
Absolutely.
And lead them from where they were to a could, not to a is, but to a could be.
A could be.
Okay.
Right. So 2004, and I was just sharing this story. He forgot at Smoky Norfolk. We were classmates. I'm a year in. We don't have any resources. Bishop Bryant, which is Jamal Bryant's dad, was
AME Bishop. Yeah.
AME Bishop had came to the church. Second month in, he had his annual conference at that church. Church was packed. And he leaned over and said to me, I want you to see your future now.
That's awesome.
Right. So he challenged me in that moment to start to see beyond where I was. And that activated the visionary in me. Right.
Let me ask you this. How important is it for a leader to not only have a mental picture of where they want to go, but to see it in concrete? How important is that for a leader?
I think it becomes your catalyst to who you shall become.
Okay.
Right. If you don't have that, what anchors you? What gives you the resolve to get up and go back at it every day when there's nothing to see?
Right.
When the naysayers are saying it's not going to work. When they say you're too young or you're not the traditional CME or where did you get him from, that kind of thing, right? You have to really have a resolve to go at it. And then create a community around you of believers that believe what you believe.
Yeah.
That's going to be the thing that encourages you along the way, right? So, going back to the sale of the house, a new leader came, joined the church and says, well, the only way I see you moving forward is to be able to sell this property, relieve some of the debt. You ain't going to get rid of all of it, but relieve some of the debt so now you can start putting money into mission, right? And that will help grow the church. That was the biggest church fight I probably ever had.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Getting a church to let go of property?
So it was people who were not actively involved start coming back then so they could vote.
So they could vote against the future, yeah.
Right. So I started teaching out of the book of Nehemiah. And one of the scriptures that became glaringly clear, he says, take a census. So the same vision I was telling people to come join the church was the same vision I began to articulate of why the house needed to be sold.
Gotcha.
You follow what I'm saying?
I follow you.
So as a process of that, once that happened, that break happened, it's like the floodgates just opened. People start coming from out of nowhere. So then I had to, one of the things that I will say as far as a principle, be mindful to do often self-assessment of yourself.
Okay.
Because the version that you start with is not the version that will carry you to where God is trying to take you.
So there's an awesome book called What Got You Here Won't Get You There. We'll link to that in the show notes. We want you to see that. You also talked about trust, another awesome book, Sam Chan, Leading at the Pace of Trust. We'll link to that in the show notes. We want leaders or readers. We want y'all to be able to have resources to go with this. Let me ask you this. What were the changes you had to develop? I mean, you're a 29-year-old leader, and this is, how long are we talking in here? About 4 years in, 5 years in?
About 4 years in, yeah.
About 4 years in.
Yeah.
What were the shifts you had to make from young 29-year-old to 33, 34-year-old of what's now a growing church?
Well, the major shift was normally it takes 5 to 7 years before you become pastor.
Yeah.
Right. I had so many crises that I became pastor immediately.
Gotcha.
So how do I use that trust capital to further catapult the church forward? So the change that I had to make was around my disciplines, right? That I could not be willy-nilly no more in how I preached, how I used time. I spent an inordinate amount of time out, in the community, which was very different versus when I came, I spent a lot of time inward, because I was more priestly. Yeah. But as the church grew, I became more prophetic. So I got involved politically. I got involved civically. I began to see what the issues and the needs were of the community, and wherever the community scratched, or wherever the community was itching, that's where I scratched.
Gotcha.
So if there was a gala for the 100 Black Men, I was on program as an invocator, right? If there was a program for the Links for the community, they used our church, right? So I used our property, which we had great property, as a catalyst to start moving people through and seeing us as that community church. For example, early on, we had authors that would come in that were not only emerging authors, but like Toni Morrison, for example, being in that setting. I'm drawing links of names. Early on we had Ted Kennedy. Okay. When Obama was getting ready to run, he stomped at Beebe.
Nice.
You know, that was the first and last trip that he had before he, succumbed to death.
Sure.
It was in Beebe. Angela Davis did a big conversation right there, really talking about how when she was in jail and what her movement meant to the community, those kind of things. So using that platform to kind of collaborate, network, and continue to build relationship capital was the catalyst for the church to sustain itself.
So you had to shift from being an inward-focused leader to being a community-focused leader.
Right.
And that required a level of discipline around. I think sometimes leaders underestimate the discipline of time. I'm just listening to everything that you were doing, because let's all be clear, let's not forget, you were still doing weddings, you were still doing funerals, you were still teaching Bible study, you were still preaching on Sundays, and all these other things.
Right. And still taking kids to school.
And still taking kids to school, and still having a life.
Right.
And you still only had, I'm assuming, 24 hours in a day like everybody else.
Right.
So it became the discipline of calendar, the discipline of time, the discipline, where do I put my time, where do I put my energy for the most benefit?
Right.
Yeah.
So, for example, around time management, when I came to going to, so when I kind of broke the mold of somewhat exposure, I don't like to use the term popularity. Exposure, so I would be on program at 4 different events in one night.
Gotcha.
Right. So how did I do that? Well, I got my admin together and say, we're going to hit the front end of this one. We're going to show up for a few minutes. We're going to do our prayer, whatever, and then we're going to ease out the door and we're going to go straight to the next one. So by the end of the evening, I'd hit 4 events, whether it was the benediction on the back end or the invocation on the front, or had some programmatic piece in the middle. I was able to manage the time. So when some person might use one event for the night and just call it the night, I would hit multiple, because I want to make sure that our name were in the conversation, and that's what began to grow the church.
You just said something I think every leader needs to hear. Your name has to be in the conversation. No matter how good you are, if nobody knows you're there, it's not going to matter. So this is going well. Beebe's a shining jewel of Oakland. Everybody knows the church. And you decide you're going to run for bishop.
Yes. So it wasn't quite that easy.
Okay.
Right? I never saw myself in current, I could say this now being on the other side, I never saw myself in current spaces that, how can I say it? I never saw myself being a bishop.
Gotcha.
I saw myself stand at Beebe Memorial Cathedral, retiring at 65 and moving on.
Gotcha.
Right? Several bishops asked me to run. I either evaded the conversation or just flat out said no. My last bishop I said no to before he died. He challenged me. He says, well, have you prayed about it? I was like, what's to pray about? I'm a gifted pastor.
I'm pastor.
That's my spiritual gift. I'm good, right? So long story short, he's like, I challenge you to pray. I'm going to give you 6 months. And if not 6 months, I'm going to move on. But I think you need to pray about it. And it felt like all chaos and hell broke loose, literally in my personal life. Kids was acting crazy. It was just strain, house, it was just all kind of craziness. And I talked to a person who was outside of the CME church to give me counsel, because I needed some clear advice without the political
with no motivation, just you outside of this, tell me what you think.
Right. So it was Bishop Claude Alexander I called.
Sure.
I said, hey, Bishop, help me articulate what's happening with me, because I don't understand. I said, things are well, I'm comfortable, what's going on? And he says to me, he says, has this ever happened to you any other given moment in your life? And the moment he said that, tears began to run down my eyes, because I remember the same level of chaos I experienced as when I accepted my call.
Your call to ministry. There you go.
And he said to me, maybe God is using what is familiar to help you accept your next calling, because callings are never static.
Sure.
They're always evolving. And it was from that moment.
Can you say that one more time? Because I believe sometimes leaders get stuck in a place.
Yeah.
Kind of, Elijah's by the brook during the drought, and the brook dries up, and it's time for him to move on to the widow of Zarephath. I think a lot of leaders will get stuck in where they are and what was, as opposed to being keenly aware of when God is calling them into something else. So say a little bit more about that.
So I think the reality is, and it became, I knew this, but I knew it from a place of theory, not praxis, right? I didn't know it from a place of application. And God never called you to be comfortable.
Sure.
Right. Like I'm going to talk about, in our presentation, you got to embrace discomfort. God never called you to be comfortable, right? But he called you to serve a cause or a purpose or a problem or a situation. And that's how the call becomes evolutionary. And this might be a theological stretch for some, but in process theology, it says God is ever evolving.
Yeah.
Now, for some people, that might be heretical in some sense, since God is all omniscient and all-knowing. But if you think about it, if God is a living organism and, without space or time, God can't evolve if God is God, right?
Yeah.
Right? So the same capacity, I think, exists within us as human beings, that we have to evolve to another level, another purpose. Gotcha. And I think that's where the calling and the conviction comes. And once I saw that and sensed that, it was a 4-year process that I ran for Bishop. I had to visit 32 annual conferences throughout the states of United States, Africa, Haiti, Jamaica.
Sure.
And the culmination ended in June 2022. And I was elected the 66th bishop after they casted 439 votes. And that's a whole nother process to that, but I'm grateful that I'm being on the other side.
We'll bring you back for talking about campaigning, but you are on the other side now.
Yes.
And you've gone from being the senior leader of an organization to being the leader of leaders of organizations.
Right.
What was the leadership jump? What was the evolution that you had to make going from being a pastor who runs a great church to being a bishop who's overseeing a region of great churches?
Yeah. So the jump wasn't as drastic as I thought it would be.
Okay.
And here's why. Sometimes God allows your experiences in life to prepare you for your next, right? So I served as a chair of the Oakland African American Chamber of Commerce, which was a cadre of leaders that were not religious, that didn't have to listen to me, right?
Sure.
Right, that had large capitals, investments, and some were billionaires, but they followed leadership after, again, building trust and building the relationship and become a relational leader, which is a principle that I believe in. Some people are topical, positional leaders. I'm a relational leader.
Sure.
So in addition to that, Beebe became that kind of church that was a corporate church. So you had CEOs and CIOs that were in leadership. So you had to learn how to lead them in a manner by which they were accustomed to, but also stretch them beyond where they were.
Sure.
So those fundamental principles around goal setting, around visioning, around vision setting, around getting them to honor the team, together everyone achieves more, getting them to see the greater good of their connection. Those simple principles I was able to apply to pastors. Now, however, pastors are sometimes like herding cats. You can't all get them in the same boat at the same time.
Pastors are a different breed, no two ways about it.
Absolutely. So finding, learning, discerning would make a person tick, will make them move.
Sure.
Like some people will just respect you out of the position, and others are going to kind of try you, see what you're made of, right? So you have to, in some cases, be very firm without being offensive, right? But also understanding how you catapult that relationship to get them to believe in something they've never seen before, to follow you to get there.
Gotcha.
That's the goal of how you do it. I'm not going to grow a local church anymore. That day is gone.
Right.
But I can grow the leader, and that's why TKN is important because I try to bring a different set of leaders. And watch this. You cannot lead beyond your exposure.
Right. Absolutely.
So my main responsibility I see as a leader of leaders is to expose them to as many options as possible so it can expand their imagination on who they can become as a leader.
So as a leader of leaders, you're expanding the aperture so that they can see what you see and continue to grow.
Absolutely.
Let me ask you the next thing. You're growing these folk that serve underneath you, but you're also serving them as their servant leader. What do you do at the, for lack of a better word, top to continue to grow you as a leader?
Well, I personally believe that I'm a lifelong learner.
Okay.
Right. So every conference that is going to give me a different edge, like before I will go to conferences and it will be stuff that I can use to apply in my own situation.
Sure.
Now I'm thinking about a pastor and their deficiencies.
Gotcha.
Or their strengths. So like I was just listening to, Dr. Felton, and 4 or 5 people just came across my mind that needed to hear what he shared. So in my mind I said, how can I get this content to them so they can just listen and then let's have a conversation? Yeah.
So you're curating things to pass down.
Absolutely.
So as you expand, you're curating for, well, I know I have a group that needs this. I know I have a group that needs this. I know I have a group that needs this, which obviously means that you've got to know that much more to be able to resource that many more people.
Absolutely.
Well,
Absolutely.
let me ask you this. As you look into the future, because we've talked a lot about vision, what do you see next for the capital C Church, the CME Church, your district? What do you see next as you lead? What do you think we should be leading into?
We are in a critical age in our world.
Yeah.
Right. Even though things are the same as they change, they remain the same.
Yeah.
The different nuances create new opportunities and new challenges. For example, with the world wars that are going on right now, being able to see them through the lens of social media has changed the game.
Gotcha.
The church have to have, in my opinion, in the next 20 to 30 years, all churches should have some kind of level of sensitivity around social justice. Whether it be a social justice church or not, I'm not concerned. However, I think it is important that they have a voice that speaks to the needs and the burdens of their communities.
Gotcha.
So number one. Number two, I think that the church is going to grow smaller as we grow in the next 20 to 30 years. Because while there will be, I will say, giga churches that will still exist and mega churches that will still exist, the smaller churches will dissipate if they don't have what many people are calling the spiritual coach.
Gotcha.
Versus the positional pastor.
Gotcha.
Right. In order to be a spiritual coach, you have to have some one-on-one relationships, and that can only expand on so many levels.
Right.
So that's why I believe that, and also because of the external influences that America is becoming more secular, as we talk about by the days. That Christianity won't be the dominant religion in the states by 2050, according to Barna Group. Right. So those kind of things says to me, from a theological perspective, that the church will always exist, but how will it exist?
What will it look like in the next iteration?
Exactly.
Man, this has been great, man. I appreciate you coming out. We always like to end with 3 questions to get to know you a little bit better. So let's start with the first one. Favorite sports team?
Favorite sports team? Unfortunately, right now, the Golden State Warriors.
Man, that's not unfortunate. Y'all have had a great run.
Yeah, we had a great run, but we're having some trouble right now.
Man, look, I'm a Knicks fan. It's been 50 years.
All right.
I'll trade you anytime.
Right.
I'll trade you anytime.
Right. I agree with you on that. Yeah.
All right. Okay. Favorite place to vacation? Because leaders need time off too.
Oh, so I like to travel the world.
Gotcha.
My favorite place is Lake Como.
Okay.
Out of all the places I've been, yes.
Awesome.
Yes.
And last but not least, one leadership nugget that you don't want anybody to walk away from here without knowing from you.
My leadership definition, which you'll hear in a few moments, is leadership is the ability to deliver on relationships.
Leadership is the ability to deliver on relationships.
Yes, sir.
Ladies and gentlemen, that has been Bishop Charley Hames, the 66th Bishop of the Christian Methodist Episcopal Church. We thank him for joining us. Listen, you know the TKN podcast. We are here to help leaders get to their next level. So like, subscribe, follow us on socials. You don't want to miss anything that we're doing with the TKN Leadership Podcast with Matthew Watley, the TKN Leadership Network, or anything else that we're doing. We want to level you up so that you can lead to your next place. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time.